I was standing in the economy boarding line, clutching a plastic cup of airport coffee, when I saw my husband settle comfortably into a first-class seat. He didn't see me. From where I stood, halfway down the jet bridge, I had a perfect side view through the open aircraft door. There he was in a crisp, navy blazer I'd never seen before, laughing at something the flight attendant said as she offered him champagne. He leaned back, relaxed, stretching his legs out in front of him like a man who had never worried about money in his life. A few hours earlier, that same man had kissed my forehead and told me, "I'll be buried in spreadsheets all weekend, babe. Sorry again, we can't swing a trip this year. With how broke we are, even gas to your parents' place is pushing it." Now he was tucking a leather carry-on into the overhead bin in first class. Broke. The word echoed in my head as another passenger's bag bumped my shoulder. The line shuffled forward. The gate agent scanned boarding passes with the soft, repetitive beep of a heart monitor in a hospital drama. I should have called his name. I should have marched right up that jet bridge and asked, in front of the entire cabin, why my husband could afford a first-class ticket when, according to him, we couldn't even afford to replace our sagging couch. Instead, I went very, very still. My fingers tightened around the coffee cup until the plastic crinkled. Instinct took over. I stepped slightly to the side, out of his line of sight, tilted my phone, and snapped a photo. The screen captured him at an angle, profile, champagne flute halfway to his lips, boarding group still loading around him. Evidence, my brain whispered. You don't scream until you know exactly what you're screaming about. "Ma'am," the gate agent said gently, "you're good to board." I forced my legs to move, handed over my pass, and walked onto the plane. As I passed through first class, I kept my head bowed, hair falling across my face. My heart slammed against my ribs, so hard I was sure he'd hear it. He was talking animatedly to the woman in the window seat, a woman with sleek hair, gold earrings, and the sort of effortless outfit people wear when they fly like this often. I caught a snippet of his voice. Finally used the miles, figured I deserved one decent seat this year. My stomach lurched. He'd told me we were miles poor, that we needed to save every point for an emergency. Like the emergency where his job might be at risk, the one he'd used to guilt me into canceling the beach trip I'd been quietly planning for our 10th anniversary. I slid past them, down the narrow aisle to row 27, where my company-booked middle seat waited. I sat between a college kid in a hoodie and a woman with a sleeping toddler, buckled my belt, and stared at the blurry cloud of people still boarding. My name is Rachel Turner. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a pediatric nurse. I know how to spot a fever from 10 feet away, calm panic parents, and read a vital signs monitor like some people read romance novels. What I apparently didn't know how to do, until that day, was spot a financial lie standing 5 feet in front of me wearing my husband's face. Before I tell you how I went from believing my husband when he said we were too broke for any trips to watching a judge divide up our assets while he fumbled explanations, I want to ask you something. Has anyone in your life ever told you we can't afford that so convincingly that you rearranged your entire world, your holidays, your hobbies, your sense of what you deserve, around their version of broke, only to find out later they weren't being honest at all? If you've ever had that gut punch moment where money and trust collided, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Sometimes the only thing that makes this kind of betrayal bearable is realizing you're not the only one who had to learn the hard way that we're broke can be a weapon, not just a statement. As the plane took off and the seatbelt sign chimed, I looked at the photo I'd taken. There he was, Ethan Turner, my husband of almost 10 years, in first class while his broke wife flew in the back for a work conference we'd argued for weeks about me attending because of costs. I locked my screen, closed my eyes, and made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to confront him on that flight. I wasn't even going to confront him that weekend. For the first time in our marriage, I was going to stop explaining, stop defending, and stop giving him the benefit of the doubt, and start quietly, methodically gathering proof. Because in my line of work, when a kid's symptoms don't match the parent's story, you don't ignore it. You document, you investigate, and you protect the person who can't protect themselves. In this case, that person turned out to be me. To understand why seeing Ethan in first class shook me so badly, you'd need to know what broke had looked like in our house for the previous 3 years. We met when I was 22 and he was 26, both working at the same hospital, me fresh out of nursing school, him in IT, fixing computers, and joking that he kept the life-saving machines from blue screening. He was funny, charming, the kind of guy who remembered the night shift nurses' coffee orders. Money back then was simple. We were just two young professionals with entry-level salaries and too much student debt. We ate cheap Thai takeout, went halfsies on rent, and spent any extra cash on concert tickets and weekend road trips in his beat-up Civic. We built a story together. Someday, when we were more stable, we'd travel for real. Europe, national parks, maybe even that fancy overwater bungalow resort I'd seen in magazines. He loved that dream as much as I did, or seemed to. Someday I'll put you in first class, he'd say, kissing my forehead after another 12-hour shift. You'll drink champagne and fall asleep before takeoff. We did a tiny cheap honeymoon in Asheville, Airbnb cabin, grocery store champagne, but we were happy. It felt like a down payment on a bigger life we were building step by step. The shift started small. Ethan switched jobs, moving from the hospital IT department to a private healthcare software company. The pay bump was big. Overnight, his income nearly doubled. He insisted we still live like broke students for a while to catch up on savings. It sounded responsible. I agreed. We refinanced my student loans. We paid off his car. We moved from our cramped apartment into a modest 2-bedroom rental. I picked up some overtime at the hospital, but tried not to burn out. At first, we made every financial decision together. Budget nights with pizza and spreadsheets, celebrating when our emergency fund hit $5,000, then $10,000. Then his job changed again. He moved from back-end IT into sales support. More travel, more client meetings, more performance-based bonuses. He came home with stories about colleagues closing 6-figure deals and hitting quarterly incentives. The money is crazy if you're really good, he said, half in awe, half in ambition. Around that time, the tone of our money talks shifted. Budget nights became, I'll handle it, you're exhausted from work. Our shared spreadsheet stopped getting updated. I'd ask, hey, are we still on track for the emergency fund? And he'd say, yeah, don't worry. I've got everything scheduled. You just focus on your patients. When my dad had a heart scare in Florida, and I suggested we fly down to see him, Ethan frowned over his laptop. Flights are insane right now, he said. We'd torch our savings on a 2-day trip. We can't afford that, not with the market the way it is. He pulled up some fare he'd cherry-picked, last-minute, non-stop peak times, and sure enough, the number was high. See, he said, it's not responsible. I promised my dad we'd visit soon, hung up, and told myself being an adult meant sacrificing things you wanted for long-term security. The word broke crept into Ethan's vocabulary like mold. We're basically broke after those car repairs. He'd say, we're too broke for dinners out right now. We'll be broke if the company misses targets this quarter. He said it with authority, like he had a spreadsheet somewhere that proved we were dangling over the edge of a cliff. I never saw the spreadsheet again. When I asked directly, can we go over the accounts together? He'd sigh. Babe, I stare at numbers all day. He'd say, rubbing his temples, can you please trust me to manage this? You know, I'd never put us in danger. The irony of him using my nursing shifts as the reason I shouldn't be involved in our finances didn't hit me until much later. Looking back, there were red flags I swallowed because they came wrapped in just enough truth. He did work in a volatile industry. Commission-based income did fluctuate. The pandemic hit, and travel slowed, then surged messily. Prices did go up. Nurses like me were burning out and leaving, making my hours heavier. But a funny thing happens when one person holds all the financial information. The story of we can slowly turn into the story of I know you don't. The first concrete crack appeared a few months before the first-class incident. My hospital was sending me to a pediatric conference in Denver. It was a big deal, paid for by the hospital, with travel and hotel covered. The cherry on top was that I'd get continuing education credits without having to pay out of pocket. Ethan frowned when I told him. "How many days?" he asked. I said, 3 nights. "And you're sure everything's covered?" he pushed. "No hidden fees?" "Yes," I said, laughing a little. "Flights, hotel, even meals. It's in the email. You can read it." He waved a hand. "No, I trust you. I'm just saying, we're tight right now. Any surprise expense will hurt." He'd been using that phrase a lot, "we're tight." He pointed to the electric bill, which had gone up, to gas prices, to a letter from our landlord about a rent increase. All true, all scary. So when the conference email mentioned that the hospital would book standard economy fare for flights from Charlotte to Denver, in my head I saw Ethan's frown and decided I'd be extra careful. I declined the suggested airport shuttle. I packed snacks so I wouldn't buy overpriced food. I even hesitated before ordering coffee at the gate. The night before my trip, Ethan announced he had an urgent client meeting in Atlanta that would run through the weekend. "We're trying to close a big account," he said. "If it lands, it'll fix a lot of our money stress." "You'll be gone the same days as me?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, already tapping something into his phone. "We'll swap airport stories when we get back like glamorous jet-setters." We kissed, wished each other safe travels, and went to bed back to back, each staring at a glow of separate screens. At 6 a.m. the next morning, I Ubered to the airport for my hospital-booked flight. Halfway through the security line, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Boarding now. Middle seat. Pray for me." I sent back a laughing emoji and a heart, stepped through the metal detector, and told myself our rough patch would ease once his big account closed. An hour later, standing in boarding group 3 for my own flight to Denver, I saw him settle into first class. It took me a few disbelieving seconds to process what I was seeing. My brain supplied all kinds of soothing explanations. Maybe he'd gotten a free upgrade. Maybe the client had paid. Maybe he'd been bumped up because of miles. Then I heard him mention finally used the miles to the woman next to him, and the dam inside my head quietly cracked. Those miles were earned on flights I'd stayed home for. On nights I'd covered double shifts because the overtime helps. On weekends he'd said he was too tired to go anywhere, but had to travel for work. Calling him out in that moment would have gotten me a performance, a shrug, an easy lie, some half-truth about company policy, or a one-time treat. Then he'd simply be more careful about hiding it next time. Instead, I buckle-up smiled at the flight attendant, ordered a ginger ale when the cart came by, and opened the Notes app on my phone. I wrote down the date, the flight number, the time I saw him board, the seat he took. Nurses learn early. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. By the time we landed in Denver, my rage had cooled into something sharper. I didn't know yet how deep the deception went. I didn't know about the extra credit cards, or the transfers to an account I'd never heard of, or the hotel loyalty program with stays that didn't show up on any work itinerary. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. My husband's version of "we're broke" was about control, not reality. And I was done accepting stories without seeing the charts. I didn't sleep much that first night in Denver. The conference hotel was nice, not extravagant, but new with crisp sheets and a view of the city lights. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the moment Ethan laughed in first class while I shuffled past to row 27. Every time I imagined storming down the aisle and demanding answers, another image cut in, Ethan, calm, turning it around on me. "You're overreacting, Ratch," he'd say. "You know this was a work upgrade. You always jump to conclusions. Maybe that therapist you saw after your dad died really didn't fix anything." Huh? The worst part was I could hear my own voice responding, apologizing, second-guessing, worrying that I was overreacting. I decided not to give him that chance. The next morning, after the first conference session, I ducked into a quiet corner of the hotel lobby with my laptop. While other pediatric nurses chatted about new asthma protocols, I opened a fresh browser tab and typed spouse lying about money what to do. The internet answered with a flood: financial infidelity, hidden accounts, coercive control. I learned terms I wish I'd never needed. Financial abuse, when one partner controls all the money to limit the other's independence. Money gaslighting, convincing someone they're irresponsible with money so they'll stop asking questions. Marital asset concealment, hiding shared assets like savings or miles before a divorce. I wasn't planning to divorce. Not yet. But the fact that the language existed told me this wasn't just Rachel being dramatic. I started small. I ordered my free annual credit report, not just mine, but a joint one-listing accounts tied to both our names. I set up online access to the one joint bank account I thought we had left. Then I hit the first wall. The online banking portal said my username had been disabled for inactivity. Inactivity, because Ethan had insisted on handling everything himself. I requested a password reset, clicked through security questions I hadn't answered in years, and finally, my screen filled with numbers. Some matched what I expected. The checking account with our direct deposits. The savings account we'd once celebrated hitting 5 figures, but now held far less after car repairs and medical bills. But there were line items I'd never seen before. A credit card I didn't recognize, with a limit higher than any we'd ever discussed. A home equity line of credit tied to our rental's address. Impossible, since we didn't own the house. I frowned, clicked deeper, and exhaled slowly when I realized the system was listing potential offers, not actual loans. I was jumpy. Then I spotted an external transfer section. There, in tidy rows, were monthly transfers from our joint checking into an account at a different bank, labeled simply ET Savings. The amounts weren't huge, $300 here, $500 there, but they added up. Over 2 years, more than $12,000 had flowed out. We had one shared savings account. This wasn't it. My chest tightened. There could be perfectly legitimate reasons for someone to have a separate account. Emergency fund, work travel float, a surprise. But if that were the case, why had I spent the last 2 Christmases being reminded that we're broke? Rachel, please don't go crazy on gifts. Why had I sobbed over plane ticket prices to see my dad, while Ethan shrugged and called it the reality of adulthood? I screenshotted the transfer history, saved PDFs of statements, and emailed them to a new, private email account I just created under my maiden name. It felt like cheating, not on Ethan, but on the version of myself who had sworn on our wedding day to share everything. I called my best friend, Naomi, from nursing school. Her face appeared on my phone screen, framed by her messy bun, and the chaos of her 3 kids playing in the background. "Hey, stranger," she said. "How's conference life? You sleep yet?" "Sort of," I said. "Naomi, can I ask you something completely not medical?" Her smile faded when she saw my expression. "Always." Hypothetically, I began, if your husband said you were broke and couldn't travel anywhere, but then you saw him in first class on a plane he told you he wasn't taking, what would you do? She stared for a second. Is this about Ethan? Yes, I said. Her eyes narrowed. I'd stop saying hypothetically, she replied, and I'd start calling a lawyer. I don't want a divorce, I protested, even as a small voice in my head whispered. Don't you? You don't have to want a divorce to need legal advice, she said. You work with kids. I work with contracts. Different specialties. Same rule. You don't ignore a potential disaster because hoping feels nicer. Naomi had gone into hospital administration after burning out on floor nursing. She knew numbers and people. Get copies of everything, she advised. Bank statements, pay stubs, tax returns, any emails with money in them. Don't confront him until you've talked to someone who knows how this plays out in court. Because if he's hiding money, the minute he senses, he'll hide it deeper. That sounds paranoid, I said, even as my hand reached for the hotel notepad. That sounds like every divorce case I've seen my ex-boss handle. She replied, there's a reason the first thing lawyers say is secure your documents. That night, instead of going to the conference mixer, I took a walk around downtown Denver, the thin air making my lungs work harder. I passed couples holding hands, groups of friends laughing outside restaurants, tourists dragging suitcases, and I thought about how many of them had any idea what their partners were actually doing when they said, "We're tight this month." The next morning, between sessions on pediatric pain management and vaccine schedules, I emailed a family law firm in Charlotte whose website mentioned experience with complex financial situations. I didn't know exactly what I needed, only that I couldn't unsee what I'd already seen. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself I was gathering information, just in case. But when Ethan didn't text me once that whole day, not how's Denver, not a photo of his boring hotel, nothing, while I could still picture him laughing in first class with that woman, my denial finally started to crack. When I got home, he acted normal. He picked me up at the airport, kissed me, asked how the sessions were. I studied his face, searching for some flicker of guilt or anxiety. If anything, he seemed lighter, like a man whose big stress had eased. So Atlanta? I asked casually as we drove home. How was your client meeting? He yawned. Exhausting. I swear, if I never see another conference room, it'll be too soon. No flights issues. I pressed. No upgrades. He shrugged. Middle seat misery, as promised. Why? No reason, I said, while my inner nurse scribbled mental notes. Patient denies symptom. Observation contradicts. 2 days later, I met with attorney Kelly Rhodes in a small office above a coffee shop uptown. She looked like someone's kind aunt, gray curls, soft sweater, but her eyes were sharp. After introductions, she said, "Tell me the story from the beginning. Don't edit for what you think is legally important. I'll decide that." I told her about the first-class sighting, the secret transfers, the years of "we're broke," the mounting sense that I'd been living in a version of our finances Ethan curated. She listened without interrupting, only occasionally jotting a note. When I finished, she folded her hands. "What you're describing sounds very much like financial control," she said. "Possibly fraud, depending on what else we find." "I don't want to destroy him," I said quickly. "I just want the truth, and not to be stuck in a disaster I didn't choose." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," she replied. "Here's what we're going to do." She laid it out step by step. Get copies of the last 3 years of tax returns. As a married couple filing jointly, I had as much right to them as Ethan did. Pull complete bank statements for all known accounts. Look for transfers, cash withdrawals, payments to unfamiliar companies. Request my own free credit report and a report for any joint accounts to see if there were loans or cards I'd never been told about. quietly open a checking account in my own name at a different bank, and begin diverting a portion of my paycheck there for safety. Do not, under any circumstances, tip Ethan off yet. In North Carolina, she explained, marital assets and debts are generally divided equitably. That doesn't always mean 50-50, but it means fairly. If he's been hiding assets, the court can sanction him. But if you confront him before we know the scope, he may move money close accounts or claim it never existed. And if I decide not to divorce, I asked, desperate to leave that door open. Then you'll make that choice with full information. She said, right now, you don't have that. You're being told a story without seeing the ledger. My job isn't to push you toward divorce. It's to protect your rights if you decide you need it. I walked out of her office feeling like I'd stepped through a portal into a parallel version of my life, one where I wasn't just the passenger being told to tighten my belt, but someone holding part of the steering wheel. Back home, Ethan noticed none of my quiet shifts. He complained about the cost of groceries while I downloaded bank statements in the bedroom with the door half closed. He griped about gas prices while I isolated his expense reimbursements on our joint account, noticing how often he forgot to deposit them back. The tax returns were the smoking gun. On paper, our joint income was significantly higher than the numbers Ethan had thrown around during our broke talks. His bonuses alone in the strongest year could have funded 2 overseas vacations and a new couch with change left over. Where did it go? I murmured at my kitchen table, highlighter in hand. Attorney Rhodes suggested I hire a forensic accountant for a few hours, someone who could scan the returns and statements faster than I could and spot patterns. Naomi fronted the fee as a birthday present you'll someday realize saved your life. Within a week, the accountant emailed a summary. A secret brokerage account in Ethan's name only. Regular transfers to that account from his pay before the remainder hit our joint checking. Hotel charges in cities he'd never mentioned visiting, booked under his name, but with a second guest on the reservation. And, insult to injury, multiple charges for airline tickets upgraded from economy to first class, paid out of that hidden account, not by his employer. The paper trail stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. Ethan wasn't just splurging occasionally. He'd built an entirely separate financial life, one where he enjoyed his money, his miles, and apparently his freedom, while I lived in the world where we can't afford that dictated whether I saw my dad or bought new shoes. I printed everything, slid it into a plain black folder, and hid it in my locker at the hospital. 2 days later, Ethan suggested we cancel our streaming subscriptions to save money. I looked at him for a long moment, marveling at how someone could lie so easily while the truth sat in 12-point font 3 miles away. Sure, I said, let's talk about all our subscriptions. If he heard the edge in my voice, he ignored it. His favorite habit, after all, was ignoring what didn't fit his story. Mine, now, was collecting evidence for the day I finally told mine. The confrontation didn't happen in a dramatic airport scene or a courtroom speech. It happened, like most of the real turning points in my life, at our wobbly kitchen table. A month after I'd met with Attorney Rhodes, once I had 3 years of statements, the forensic report, and a better understanding of North Carolina's marital property laws, I asked Ethan to sit down one Saturday morning. He strolled in with his coffee, wearing sweatpants and an old concert t-shirt, utterly at ease. This sounds serious, he joked. Are we finally getting a dog? I studied him. The man I'd loved, trusted, defended. The man whose version of broke had shaped my choices. Depends on how this goes. I said, I want to talk about money. He groaned. Can we not? It's the weekend. The weekend is the only time we're in the same room for more than an hour. I replied, sit. He sat, rolling his eyes. Fine, but if this is about you wanting to book some luxury trip, it's about the last 10 years of my life. I cut in, and the fact that I don't recognize how we got here. He frowned. What are you talking about? I slid a printed bank statement toward him. Do you know what this is? Our checking account, he said. Yes, Rachel. I'm aware of the thing I look at every day. Not that one, I said, flipping to the next page. This. His eyes landed on the column labeled Transfers to ET Savings. He went still for a fraction of a second. That's a side account, he said. It's nothing big. Just a little buffer I set up. Without telling me, I said, while telling me we're broke. He shrugged. I handled the big picture. You know that. You freak out over every little thing. I didn't want you obsessing over a few $100s here and there. I slid the forensic summary across the table. It's more than a few hundred. He skimmed the first line, slowed at the second, and by the third his face had lost its easy humor. Where did you get this? He demanded. It's our life, I said. A forensic accountant followed. The money. They see these patterns a lot in divorce cases. Hidden accounts, undisclosed income, first-class tickets. He flinched at that. We're not getting divorced, he snapped. This is insane. You hired someone behind my back. You've been living behind my back, I said quietly, for years. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo from the plane, and set it on the table between us. He stared at the image of himself in first class, champagne in hand. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. His world of half-truths and justifications had become so complete, he probably believed his lies were practically true. It was a work upgrade, he said slowly. We were closing a big client. They comped the ticket. The receipt says it was charged to your personal account. I replied, and that you closed the big client at a 4-star resort in Miami a week before, where you also paid out of pocket. His jaw clenched. You've been spying on me. I've been finding out what my life actually looks like. I said, because for the past 3 years, I've skipped trips, holidays, and basic comforts because my husband told me we were teetering on the edge of ruin, all while he siphoned money into a secret account, flew first class, and stayed at nice hotels I've never seen. He shoved back his chair, pacing the small kitchen. Do you have any idea how stressful my job is? He shouted. How much pressure I'm under to perform. If I take you on every trip, if I say yes to everything you want, I burn out, I lose clients, we both end up broke for real. I asked for one trip to see my sick father. I said, my voice steady. You said we couldn't afford it. You cried about gas prices. And then you spent twice that amount upgrading your seat. So you wouldn't be uncomfortable for 3 hours. He didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he switched tactics. This is about control, he said, pointing at me. You can't stand that I make more money now. You want to micromanage every cent to feel powerful. That's why you went to some shark lawyer, right? To see how much you could get in a divorce. I took a breath. This was the moment. I went to a lawyer to find out if I was crazy, I said, to see if my expectations were unreasonable, to understand what broke actually means when the numbers say otherwise. And he sneered. And she told me I'm not crazy, I said. She told me that in a marriage, hiding assets, lying about income, and using we're broke to control your partner's behavior is a form of abuse. She also told me that in this state, marital assets are divided equitably, including the account you thought I'd never find. His eyes flashed. You wouldn't. I haven't decided yet. I answered. That's what this conversation is. A chance for you to come clean, to explain, to maybe, possibly, make me believe there's any trust left to salvage. He sank back into his chair, rubbing his face. I just wanted something for myself, he muttered. You have your job, your patience, your little world where everyone thinks you're a saint. I'm just the guy behind the curtain making sure the bills get paid. That account, those flights, they were my reward. At my expense, I said, with money we both earned while you told me we couldn't afford a long weekend. Do you hear how that sounds? He looked up, anger flickering again. So what? You want half of my bonus? Half of everything? You want to punish me? I thought of long nights holding parents' hands while their children fought for breath, of the exhaustion I pushed through partly because we needed the money, of my dad's disappointed, "Quiet, maybe next time, Mija, when I canceled my visit. I want a life where my partner doesn't lie to me," I said. "If that means half of everything, that's not punishment. That's the law." The next week was a blur of slammed doors, angry texts, and stony silences. Ethan alternated between pleading, "We can fix this," and threatening, "You'll regret blowing up our marriage over a few flights." He accused me of airing our dirty laundry when he realized I'd spoken to Naomi. He suggested starting fresh, which in his mind meant me dropping the subject and trusting him again with full control. I moved a portion of my direct deposit into my new solo account. He noticed. One night, he confronted me in the hallway. "You're really doing this," he said bitterly. "You're preparing to leave." "I'm preparing not to be trapped," I answered. 2 weeks later, after he forgot to give me his pay stub for the third time, and I discovered a new transfer to yet another account, I called Attorney Rhodes and said the words I'd been avoiding. "I think I'm ready to file." The divorce process wasn't glamorous. It was paperwork, meetings, and more emotional whiplash than I'd ever experienced. There were days I wanted to stuff everything back into the closet and pretend I hadn't seen the ledger. But every time I doubted, I pictured him in first class, laughing, while I sat in economy counting pennies. Discovery forced Ethan into the light. He had to disclose all accounts under oath. When he tried to forget the brokerage account, the forensic report flagged the discrepancy. Attorney Rhodes pressed, the judge frowned, and suddenly Ethan was facing not just a furious ex-wife, but a court that did not appreciate being lied to. In the settlement, I got half of the hidden savings, a portion of his retirement account, and, most precious to me, the freedom to rebuild my life without his story about money dictating my choices. He kept some of his toys, and his illusion of being the victim bled dry by a greedy ex. I kept my nursing job, my integrity, and a deep, hard-earned understanding of my own worth. A year after our divorce was final, I sat on a plane headed to Portugal with Naomi for a long delayed, we survived our 30s trip. Economy, not first class. But I paid for both tickets in cash from an account with my name on it, whose balance I could see any time I wanted. As the plane took off, Naomi nudged me. "Any last words for Ethan?" she joked. I thought about it, then shook my head. "He already heard the only one that mattered," I said. No. No to secrecy. No to being told I was irresponsible for wanting small joys while he helped himself to big ones in the shadows. No to a marriage where we're broke meant you're not allowed to want more than I say you can. Money, I've learned, is never just numbers. It's power. It's choice. It's the difference between staying in a burning house and walking out with your head high. If you've ever been told we're broke by someone who made you feel guilty for even asking questions, I hope my story gives you something I didn't have for too long: permission to look at the numbers yourself. You don't have to be a financial expert to know when something feels wrong. You just have to trust your gut enough to check the ledger. If you've lived through anything like this, financial secrets, first-class lies, or realizing your partner wasn't actually on your team, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because the moment you stop accepting someone else's version of broke and start defining your own idea of enough, that's when your real life, the one you actually own, finally begins.